Certainly not the first time we've had different messages from President Trump in the US and then from Iran on the other hand. What do you make of the different messages this time?
Well, I think, you've kind of referred to the underlying problem here is that from the Iranian perspective, there doesn't seem to be any consistency in what the administration is saying, even after the G7 meeting and Javad Zarif's visit to Biarritz. There's still a sense that if Mr. Trump makes these remarks in one context, they will change in another context on another day. And that is, of course, because his advisors and many elements of his administration are very, very hawkish on Iran. So I don't think that the government in Iran is looking at these latest comments from Trump any differently. I think what they are mostly focused on is what the Europeans can do and what specifically France can do. I think they're welcomed quite broadly, at least within the government in Tehran, what Macron has been trying to do and the efforts that he's been making. But I doubt that the position, as we've seen already from what Rouhani has said in Tehran, will change much.
Yeah, and Golnar, if the meeting were to go ahead, it would, of course, be the first meeting between a US president and an Iranian leader in 40 years. Earlier, the comments from Iran were that they didn't want a photo op meeting to happen. So how likely is it that this meeting could actually go ahead? Could it happen without sanctions being lifted?
Well, I think the next big event we're going to look towards within this context is the UN General Assembly in late September at the United Nations in New York. Again, the idea of there being any kind of meeting between Rouhani and Trump, I think that's extremely unlikely. And I think that's what Rouhani was saying today. He said, forget about any photo opportunities. He said, I don't want a photo op. If Trump wants that, he can do it with Photoshop. Those were roughly his words. So I think what's important is what the Europeans can do behind the scenes and anyone else in those back-channel meetings on the sidelines of the United Nations meeting. That's what is going to be key looking ahead in September.
Golnar, this would be extraordinary, and for many Americans of an older vintage, it harkens back to late 1979 and into 1980. My mathematics tells me that was a few years ago. Is there a collective memory in Iran of those turbulent months of 79 and 80?
Definitely. The revolution was a seismic event, not just for Iran, but in terms of global politics and for the Middle East region. And the men who are in control in Iran right now, and the very few women who are also in government in Iran, they were very much part of the vanguard of that revolution. And I think the same can be said to an extent in Washington. I think, men of Donald Trump and John Bolton's generation, the hostage crisis, in 1979, the takeover of the US Embassy, I think that also looms very large in their minds. So it's kind of a battle of these two different generations right now, I think, between Tehran and Washington.